Welcome to the MAM Journals. Today I'm going to be covering my BMW S 1000RR. Some of you are already familiar with the channel and you'll know the sort of format that I like to use. This is a static review and display. So for those of you who are new to the channel and just accidentally found the video, if you're looking for videos of riders doing wheelies, stoppies, power slides, and demonstrating the full capabilities on track, sadly this isn't the video for you. But equally, and I do hope, if you're somebody who would like to know a little bit more about the bike, you've admired it from afar and you want to know what it's all about and the various histories of it, this is a video which I hope you'll find useful. I'm going to do it in a structured way. The first thing I'm going to talk about is the generational development of the bike and when it was after it was officially commercially launched in 2010 and up to the current day, but mostly I'll be talking about this particular bike, which is a 2015 Gen 3. I'm also want to talk about the sporting heritage of the bike because it's a sports bike but race orientated. BMW developed the bike to compete with, and I'll be talking about how they've done on that background. I'd then like to do a technical walk around the bike and try and break down into manageable sort of steps and processes exactly what technology this has got on it without getting too lost in technical details. So I'm hoping to do the technical overview in layman's terms because I know that some of us find some of the technology on these modern bikes quite intimidating. And in particular during that technical review, I think I should be talking about the various control mechanisms they've got, which influences the modes you can ride the bike on. There aren't many advantages to getting older, but one of them is that actually you can laugh at yourself. And I actually took this bike probably a year after I bought it in 2015 to Donington, a race circuit in the UK, and had a wobble round in the slow group. I actually took it with another bike as well, a GSX-R 750, and I just thought I just want to have a go at this, and because I, like most people of my generation, have been a little bit sceptical about some of the technology that's been introduced in bikes over the years. We learnt to ride on bikes that had no technology of any electronic type, and therefore we can be a bit sceptical about it. And this is the bike that cured me of that technophobia in terms of what it can do, because I took the bike round in the novice group, because I'm an average rider. I don't consider myself a track rider of any shape or form, and I took it around in the novice group, and having enjoyed a couple of laps, I thought, I know, I'll turn the technology off. And anybody who knows Donington will know that the second or third corner, depending how you look at it, is a corner at the top of the crane of curves. By the time I got to there, I recognised that I actually needed to turn it all back on again, because with the power this produces, technology is a real asset, and it's just about getting comfortable with using it. And after the technical overview, the final part that I'm going to be doing is my personal views on the bike. And I've done a couple hundred miles on this bike so far this year, after riding some other bikes during the winter. And I stopped for a cup of tea at a cafe, and a rider came up to me and asked me, having looked at the bike, he said, "Do you need to be an expert to ride one of those?" And I quickly responded, "Well, I hope not, because in which case I'm going to have to sell it." And really, I thought that was a great question. Do you need to be an expert to ride a bike with this sort of power and this sort of technology? Or can somebody like me, or like maybe many of you, an average road rider, enjoy the experience, power and performance that this bike delivers? So I hope you enjoy the video, and let's crack on and talk about the generational development of the bike. The bike was actually introduced in April 2008 in Munich, and they made 1,000 initially to satisfy world superbike homologations. They didn't expand into commercial production until 2010. The Gen 1 was fitted with ABS and optional dynamic traction control. It came standard with 3 riding modes and an additional slick mode, which I'll cover later. It was also the first production bike to have optional quick shifter. The Gen 2 introduced improved throttle response and dynamic traction control, They also updated the chassis, spring rates and suspension valving. In 2013, the HP4 version was launched, which was essentially a more track-orientated version of the bike. It had upgrades to the dynamic damping system, Brembo brakes, improved riding modes and combined braking. Many of these features were incorporated within the dynamic and race packages, which were optional when they launched the Gen 3 in 2015. We all look at things slightly differently, but for me, the way I quickly identify a Gen 3 is by looking at the lower extended fairing and the exhaust window in the middle, as well as the two-tone rear silencer. These standard exhausts are pretty loud, which personally I like. One website identifies this, which most consider an upgrade, as a Gen 4. But in my view, probably rightly, most consider Gen 4 to be the 2019 introduced shift cam engine version, which was both lighter and more powerful, as well as having further improvements to the electronic rider aids. The M1000RR was launched in September 2020 and intended as a basis for a race bike, but still road legal. They had made another HP4 in 2017 that was actually only track use. The M1000RR is the first bike to use the M prefix normally associated with BMW's performance cars, and it was also the first of the bikes with winglets. Clearly, I've skipped over a lot of detail here, but I am simply trying to give you a basic outline of the development and evolution of the bike. If any experts watching want to correct any errors, please feel free to do so in the comments below. I certainly won't be offended. Right, I said in my introduction that I'd talk about the racing heritage of the bike. BMW hadn't been, until the introduction of this bike, hadn't been really competing on race tracks for many, many years. In fact, the last time I can remember BMW winning a superbike series was 1976 in the AMA Superbike Series, when they won the opening series then on a twin. So when they introduced this bike, they were aiming it, I guess, at two categories. In terms of this super bike, which is more modified bikes based on a homologation bike, i.e. a production bike, and super stock, which is closer to the factory specification when they were launched. They've enjoyed significant success in super stock. In fact, in 2010, they won the FIM Super Stock Series with Ayrton Badavini, who virtually won every race. So clearly, out of the box, this is a very competitive bike. They've also enjoyed success at the Isle of Man. 2014, Michael Dunlop won 2 races on the bike, super stock and one other, and Peter Hickman has enjoyed significant success on the bike as well. I think he's won it 4 times in super stock. I think it was 2016, 17, 18 and 19. When he won the bike, he also won, I think, the senior TT as well. So they, as a standard bike, slightly modified for racing within the regulations, it's enjoyed huge success. In World Superbike Series, it has not yet reached, I'm sure, the level of success that BMW aspire to. They actually signed up for their first series. They raced first in 2009, and they signed up riders obviously in 2008 to do that, and they signed up an Australian by the name of Troy Corser, who was a 2-time World Superbike champion. He won 96 with a Ducati, and he won actually in 2005 with the only time Suzuki have won the series with a K5. So clearly they were serious. They also signed up Ruben Zaus, a Spanish rider who is very talented, but they didn't achieve much success with that in that first season. I think they're probably best placings from memory, and again, feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, but I think they got a 5th, maybe a 7th. So they've not yet cracked world superbikes. Now clearly for this bike, which was a landmark bike for BMW, their aspirations are going to be to actually get that final blessing by winning the World Superbike Series, and I do hope that they manage to eventually do so, because they're certainly renewing their efforts, energy and budget in order to do so in the 2022 series, which I'm looking forward to watching. So it's a bike that's had good racing success, but not yet the success that BMW aspire to. Okay, let's start with a technical walk around. The bike is just full of purposeful design, and obviously with a bike of this, probably the most logical place to start is with the engine. It's a water and oil cooled inline 4, 4 valves per cylinder, with 2 overhead cams, not dual or not double as we often refer to them, and I get the 2 from BMW's handbook, and 999cc. It produces 146 kilowatts of power according to the manual, and that actually translates on my app to 196 brake horsepower, although most specs that I read on the bike describe it as being 199, so that may somehow be an error in translation. Produces the power at 13,500 revs. The bike is capable of 186 miles per hour, according to most of the tests that I've seen, although I've seen some people claiming 190. 0 to 60, less than 3 seconds, so it's not short of performance. Many times I've got off this bike and wished I had more talent, but I can honestly say I've never got off it and thought what that thing needs is more power. But I'm sure there's others who do maximise it. Obviously during the various generations they have developed them over the years, and they've made changes with geometry, largely either making it slightly shorter or slightly longer about stability, and changes to the front rake in order to alter its speed of turning as they seek that ultimate balance that they're looking for. The latest one, the M1000RR, produces 212 brake horsepower. This bike weighs 204 kilograms, which in old money is 450 pounds. And the very latest one, the M, is 193. Just to give you, but they're actually quite heavy weights. And although obviously 193 is pretty impressive, but just to give you a comparison of another generation of performance bikes, that 996R is 190, and that SP1 is 199. So it just gives you an idea of how much weight has been added through regulatory environment in terms of emissions and various other things, because I'm sure they didn't want to pile on extra pounds if they could possibly help it. The bike is fitted with Brembo brakes, which you can see there, and that's it's got 2 discs, 320s with 4 piston radial calipers on it, and the rear is, I'll just find a way of getting me around there. That one there is a 220 single piston. So the brakes are very good, and they're quite sharp compared to some of the other bikes that I ride. But I don't find they lack in feel. But your braking points are obviously a bit different in a bike of this class than they are some of the others that I ride. But once you get familiar with it, I mean, they're very, very capable brakes. I mean, obviously if people take them on track, I'm sure they do modify them or put different pads in or various things. But for road use, they are very, very good brakes. In terms of seat height, often people are interested about how high they are from the ground. It's 32 inches in terms of that. I find that my inside leg is 29 and a bit really. So I actually find it okay. I don't feel I'm teetering on the bike, and I'm very comfortable with it, but it has been helped that I'm now doing a lot more mileage on bikes, so you gradually get more and more comfortable with that. That's a 17.5 litre tank, which in the real world means you get about 150 miles, something like that. I get 40 something to the gallon, mid 40s sensible-ish, and low 40s with a little more enthusiasm. Technology on the bike, because obviously a lot of the characteristics of the bike are driven by the technology. I think there's probably 4 things we need to talk about. ABS on the brakes. They're obviously linked brakes. In other words, the back brake operates along with the front. It's got something called ASC, which is automatic stability control. If you think in terms of wheelies and slides, it's controlling how much they'll happen, and that's something which the expert riders tend to want to adjust. It's got DDC, all these acronyms that drive you crazy really if you let them, and that's dynamic damping control, and that was an option on this particular bike. And what it's effectively doing, in the old days, I can still remember the way you adjusted suspension was a C-spanner and a hammer, and normally involved a lot of unsuitable words. But if you look in there, that little attachment there into, hopefully you can see it there, into that little switch there, that's adjusting, I think I read somewhere 11 times a second, probably quicker than we can adjust it with a screwdriver, and is actually automatically setting up the right suspension for the roads that you've gone within certain parameters set on the initial modes. And it does so at the front as well. And you can see you've got technology wires at the top here, not threaded nuts and screws to adjust. And you adjust that all by a computer, which I'll just touch on in a moment. It's also got dynamic traction control, which most people will probably nowadays be familiar with, this idea that it's altering the power to stop you spinning it up and holding it back. And that again can be controlled by the central dash. All of these units are interlinked by something that's called an IMU, an inertial measurement unit, which is processing it all and sending it through via something called a CAN bus into modes, so to allow it to understand where you are. Now they've changed in technology. An IMU measures pitch, roll and yaw, and that's a 6-axis, and I don't think this is 6 actually, I think this is a 5. We won't bother with the technicalities of what the differences are. Basically it knows what angle you're on and therefore affects the level of traction it gives you depending on where the bike is leaning or otherwise. And over time they got more sophisticated. I think this Gen 4 is the one with a 6-axis. So further improvements, which is really the history of this bike, and the generational improvement is about the technology and as they've enabled it to develop further as they've gone. Okay, so let's go to the front of the dash, and because the reason why I talk through those 4 technology additions that the bike has got, that is really influenced here by your mode. And what they do is, let me just turn the dash on and I'll show you. Welcome to NASA control. All the lights flashed on there. I now put something on screen which shows you with all the lights on, and I'll talk you through how those modes actually work and what the warning lights mean. Right, so as you look at that, if you look at about 5 o'clock on the photo there, you can see the modes that are illustrated, and there's 5 modes available on the bike, 3 of which are available and 2 of which are highlighted as being potentially available. I'll talk about that in a second, but you've got rain, sport and race being the main modes, and they are selected by the handlebar button on the right hand side, and you just simply cursor through, press through it, and it will give you each of those modes, and they're designed to have certain parameters of the 4 control systems that we've talked about. So they'll be influencing what level of ABS, what level of damping control, what level of traction control, and what level of stability control that you've got. So they're almost like preset options, and if you think of those of just having, you just press the button and the machine already knows what parameters it wants to operate in. And rain being obviously the softest mode, where it won't give you the full torque levels, sport giving you fuller performance and giving you access to the full torque, but with slightly different degrees of control via the other mechanisms, and race mode being giving you and is designed for track use but with road tyres, so it's enabling you to get access to more of the power and have slightly different suspension settings, because obviously they assume that a track, quite right, is probably going to be a bit smoother with less undulations in the main than the roads that you ride on. The other 2 options, the slick and the user options, you enable that by, actually, if I just show you this, that's a little, I'll put it on the seat there, because that little toggle which you press in, you remove the seat, you put it in, and that enables you to program and access the slick mode, which, as the title implies, is for use with slick tyres. And user, that final option, is, think about, you can pick the various permutations for your own personal preferences. So you can set up the various damping and various other areas, set it up, and then say that's the profile that I want. So that's really, I would describe, the last 2 are designed for advanced users only. Although obviously all of us can have a dabble with it if we wish, but be careful when you're doing it, and I'll touch on that a bit later. In terms of all the instrumentation there and all those lights going on, engine management warnings, speed control, and touring capability, you can turn ABS and, well, actually you can turn off damping, and you can turn off stability control as well, just by cursoring through on the switches on the left-hand handlebar, and then deciding whether, firstly, you want them on and off, and then within various degrees of settings within that. If it sounds complicated, it is slightly complicated in terms of setting it up initially and understanding how the mechanisms work. And certainly later bikes, I've got a Hayabusa Gen 3, which is a bit more intuitive because it's slightly later technology than this, but it is doable, and it is actually quite straightforward when you just think about 5 modes, or essentially 3 main modes, and the modes that you have within those performance packets. The white light to the right hand side of the photo is a gear change that will flash when it tells you that you're due to change. Obviously indicators, and then there's that orange light with a warning symbol is when you get faults on. There's actually 8 pages of instructions in the manual, so I don't propose to go through all of them, telling you which, if you've got that flashing, which of the issues your systems have got and how you need to reset them. So it is quite complicated, but not as complicated as you might fear, and once you get yourself familiar with it, relatively easily to manage and turn on and off accordingly. Some of the functions you can actually adjust on the go, but again, I would suggest that's something for when you're more comfortable on the bike and more settled with it. Other options which I particularly like on the bike are I do love a heated grip, and I think the fact that they put it on suggests that this bike is for real road use as well as track use. And again, something which you wouldn't think at a glance, well, why would I need that? Cruise control, which is quite useful to set a sensible limit, just in case you inadvertently go faster than you perhaps had planned, because it is a bike that is deceptively fast. You will look down on occasions and think, really? Anyway, it is very good fun. You've also got, as you can see, a lap timer on there, again for track use, and it shows your lean angle as well, which is all good fun and for more advanced users. So there's a huge amount of technology on the bike, and I've only really touched the surface on it. Reading the handbook probably took me 4 hours. So I'm unlikely to get in 10-15 minutes, unlikely to give you a comprehensive view, but I hope I've given you some reassurance that the technology and the way it's used is both logical and relatively easy to set up, and already has some preset parameters which help you just use the bike in a straightforward way. So we've covered the generational history of the bike, we've been through sporting heritage, we've had a technical look round, and now what are my personal opinions on the bike? Well, I think this is a landmark bike. It's a feat of technology and engineering, and it's bristling with rider assistance aids and electronics. It's an exceptionally fast and capable bike. And the million-dollar question, is it for experts only? My view is no, but that's qualified. And what are my qualifications? Well, I'd say 3 things really. This is not a bike for a novice rider. The thought of somebody getting on one of these, having not ridden any fast performance bikes in the past, is, to me, probably a little daunting. Second thing I would say is, depends how many miles you do a year. I am a regular reader of MCN, and I don't agree with everything they say, but I do think they do a good job and raise a number of important issues. And one of the campaigns they're running is to encourage riders to do 5,000 miles a year. And it's only by doing those sort of miles that you get your bike awareness back and your positional sense tuned in. And I think this bike would benefit and be better ridden by those that are doing a bit more mileage. I certainly know in my experience, I've done very little mileage on the bike because I only rode a couple of thousand miles a year. And I didn't really find that when I rode the bike with that level of riding that I could do either it or myself justice. It's only now that I'm riding more regularly throughout the winter and putting miles on bikes that I feel comfortable to actually start enjoying the performance levels that this bike offers. And my third caveat is that for an average road rider, rely on the technology. This bike has been programmed to make it safer and easier to ride, recognizing it's got such a high level of performance. Experts can enjoy this bike significantly more by disabling some of the technology and exploring those outer limits. But that's not something that I would advocate for an average rider, because the speed at which those limits are explored are such that most riders wouldn't be able to react in time to capture it. So, am I advocating the bike for ordinary road use? Yes, I am. It's fast, capable. You'll have a lot of fun on it, although you may still need to leave your license by the shredding machine after you've been out for a ride. Anyway, I hope that you found this video informative and helpful. And if you have, you might be kind enough to press either the like button or even consider subscribing to the channel. But whether you do any of that, what I do hope that you do is that you ride safe and you stay well.